All right. So welcome. My name is Suzanne Kahn, and I am the Education Director at the Wells Reserve in Wells, Maine. And this program today is a partnership between the Wells Reserve in Maine and also the Wacoit Bay Reserve in Massachusetts. My colleague Joan is co-host today, and we head up the education programs at our reserves. We're 2 of 29 reserves in the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, which is a system of nature preserves that exist to protect estuaries, where rivers meet the sea. And each of our reserves has an education program where we provide programs such as this one today. And we also have research programs and conservation programs. So we'll be putting our websites in the chat box so you can check out our future programs. All of the details about our offerings are on our website. So we'll get those in the chat box soon so you can have those with you. Today, in case you haven't heard yet, we're asking everyone to keep your video off and keep yourself muted, and that's because we have over 200 people registered for this program today, which is a record for both of us, for both the Wells Reserve and the Wacoit Bay Reserve, and we just want to make sure that bandwidth is working and preserved. So please help us out with that. And I am recording this program. It will eventually, hopefully in the next few days, be on the Wells Reserve's YouTube site. So if you have friends who missed the program or just want to watch it again, feel free to check out the Wells Reserve's YouTube, and it should be there soon. Also, I'm sure lots of questions are going to come up during the presentation. Rather than asking them during the program, we're asking that people type their questions in the chat box. And if you don't know where the chat box is on desktops, if you just move your mouse a little bit on the screen, a menu shows up at the bottom of the screen, and there's something that says chat. And if you click on that, you'll see a box where you can type in your questions. And we're hoping that we'll have some time at the end of the program and we can address at least some of the questions that come up today. I think those are the housekeeping issues I had to share. And now I want to introduce our speaker, Dr. Greg Skomal, who is a fisheries scientist with the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries and heads up the Massachusetts Shark Research Program. He's also adjunct faculty at the University of Massachusetts School for Marine Science and Technology and an adjunct scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. So Joan and I are so thrilled that he has agreed to do a presentation for our reserves today, and thank you all for being here as well. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Greg.
Hi everybody. Thanks, Suzanne. Thank you, Joan. It's a great opportunity to be able to speak to a big group of people these days, and it's really odd to do it from my house, but I've gotten used to it over the last year, and I guess we're all working in a different world right now, but I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about the research going on. And I know there's a lot of interest up in Maine, in particular, with reference to the event of last year that resulted in the fatality of a swimmer. And I'm going to try to put this research in the context of the broader region, but realize it's very, very Cape Cod centric because we've been working intensively for the last decade off the coast of Cape Cod and using a variety of techniques. And I can't go over everything that we're doing because there's a lot, but I am going to touch on what our focus is currently and what it will be for the next couple of years. So hopefully this slideshow works and you guys can see it. And so our research over the last decade has been really focused on movement ecology, what these animals are doing over broad and fine scales. And when we talk about fine scales, we're really talking about behavior. So I'm going to focus a lot on that today. We are also currently working on a population study to get a sense of how many sharks visit Massachusetts and the region each year. And that is progressing very well. Megan Winton, who I collaborate with from the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, is focused on that in addition to a lot of other things. And we collaborate with a number of institutions on various aspects of the natural history, population structure of this species as well. But as I said, today I'm going to focus on movement ecology because it tells us what these animals are doing in three-dimensional space over multiple scales. What I always like to do when I start my talks is put things in a historical perspective relative to the distribution of the white shark in the Western North Atlantic. And what these dots represent are individual white sharks that have been documented off our coastline of the US, eastern coastline of the US, dating back to 1800. So these are historical sightings data. And what I want you to do is focus here on New England and the northeastern US and Canada. And what you can see is that from a historical perspective, dating back to the early 1800s, we have documented the occurrence of white sharks. And these are, for the most part, fisheries interactions. These are white sharks captured by fishing fleets over time. There was a paper back in 1998 written by Paul Milano that basically looks specifically at the Maine white sharks, the occurrence of white sharks in Maine as well as in Canadian waters. And many of those are these green dots that I've circled here. And as I said, they date back to the early 1800s. So this idea that white sharks coming into New England is a new phenomenon is not true. White sharks have always been visiting this part of the world. We just don't see them very often. And I think, as he states in his abstract here, the data that he shows suggests that the white shark is a perennial seasonal visitor to the northern Gulf of Maine. And that is the case too, because we have a couple other papers here by Casey and Pratt and Toby Curtis and others documenting the presence of these animals, the seasonal presence of these animals. Many of those little green dots over the course of time have been brought to the dock. This is a very small white shark that was landed back when I was working at the Narragansett Cooperative Shark Tagging Program in the 80s. This is a big white shark that was harpooned during that same period. So much of what we know about the white shark in the Atlantic, along the eastern seaboard, specifically in the western North Atlantic, comes from the examination of dead specimens. And so a lot of my early work with white sharks really did revolve around trying to learn about its natural history from the dissection of dead specimens. We really didn't learn anything about the behavior. Dead specimens can tell you what white sharks eat. They can give you a sense of growth rates by looking at rings in their vertebrae. You can look at their reproductive status, males, females, size at maturity even, but they don't tell you a lot about the behavior or the movement ecology of those animals. And the only paper really, up until we started our research in 2009, focusing on the movements of white sharks, was a paper that was written in 1982, published in 1982, but the research was conducted in 1979 by Frank Carey, who was at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And he was really a pioneer in the tracking the movements of fish. And he built his own acoustic tags, and I'm going to talk a lot about the different technologies today that we're using. Frank actually built his own acoustic tags in his lab in Woods Hole. And he was fortunate to get a report of a white shark feeding on a whale carcass. And what he did was he tracked that shark over the course of a few days by inserting one of his transmitters into the base of the dorsal fin of that shark. So what you see in the upper right here is the movement of shark, which was basically from one end of Long Island to the other, remaining in offshore areas. But then you also see in the bottom graphic here the behavior of that shark vertically. in the water column. And you could see that the shark, for the most part, stayed up in surface waters, but made periodic trips to the bottom. And in this really fascinating paper, which was the first track of a white shark in the world, he talks about the Atlantic Ocean and why we don't see a lot of white sharks in the Atlantic. And he hypothesizes that it has a lot to do with the fact that seal populations had been driven to the brink of extinction over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries. And as a result, there was no aggregating force to bring white sharks in closer to shore. Well, as we know, we can now fast forward, 30 years, and we can talk about what's changed off the coast of the northeastern of the United States. And the situation that Frank was dealing with back in 1979 has changed dramatically. And we have seen an absolute population rebound of all seal populations. And I think the white sharks in particular are targeting gray seals over the course of the last almost 50 years, and as a result of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And this restoration has occurred throughout the Gulf of Maine, often in Canadian waters, all the way down to southern New England, where we see now high densities of seals. And it's no secret to anybody probably that's on this talk that if you are anywhere near the water on Cape Cod, you will typically see seals. And that occurs throughout the Gulf of Maine into Canada. And so what we're seeing now is a response of white sharks to the growing presence of seals, because white sharks are top predators of seals. The job of a white shark as it gets bigger is to eat seals. And the white shark is really one of the few predators on Earth that has the capacity to do that. It's got the size, it's got the strength. And what's really fascinating about white sharks is as they go through almost a stage of puberty, they go from being fairly skinny and fast to being really big, robust, muscular, and fast. And their tooth morphology shape changes to a perfectly serrated cutting tool that's very well adapted to killing seals and scavenging whale carcasses. So with the growing presence of seals, we are now seeing white sharks not only off the coast of Massachusetts, but also off the coast of Maine and Canadian waters, where these two species, or these two groups, overlap on a seasonal basis. So here's a photograph of the Outer Cape with a white shark very, very close to seals that it is attempting to hunt. And so a lot of our work recently has been shifting to better understanding this behavior that we're seeing very, very close to shore. And as you can imagine, there are now public safety implications associated with the overlap of white sharks, the predator, and their prey species, which can be gray seals, harbor seals, and perhaps other species of seals, and human beings, which have now populated these areas and recreate in these areas. And so with this overlap, there has been an increase in interactions between sharks and people. This was a 1936 shark attack that occurred in Buzzards Bay, actually not far from where I live in Marion, in the town of Mattapoisett. And a young man was killed by a white shark not too far from here. That was in 1936, and that's exactly where that occurred. Now, over the course of the last decade or so, we have seen an increase in, since 2012, in interactions between sharks and people. A swimmer was bitten in 2012 off Truro. Kayakers had their kayaks struck by a white shark off Plymouth in 2014. Paddleboarder had his paddleboard struck in 2017 off of Wellfleet. We had a swimmer bitten in 2018 off Truro again. And of course, a fatal shark attack in 2018, a month later, on a bodyboarder. And so this increase is a result of the close proximity of sharks with their prey and the overlap with human activities. And of course, we all know what happened in the state of Maine in 2020 when a woman was struck and killed by a white shark. And as a result, we've kind of moved away from taking a look at the broader picture of white sharks from a conservation perspective, which we still think about and we work on. We're also drilling really deeper into the predatory behavior of this species to try to get a better sense of where, when, and how white sharks are hunting their prey. We think if we can find patterns in these aspects of the predatory event, we'll be able to predict those areas or perhaps those times when white sharks or people might be more vulnerable to the potential of an interaction with a white shark. And so we really intensified this work starting in 2019. And much of what I'll present goes back, though, to our work that we started in 2010 when it comes to getting a sense of when and where white sharks spend their time. And again, this is going to be Cape Cod centric, and it's not everything we're doing, but you could see how these same tools we're using now and what we're learning about white sharks and their prey can be applied to where this species is going throughout the region, all the way up to Canada. And so this has been the focus of our work over the last 2 years. And our tagging technique is fairly unique in that we don't use attractants to bring sharks to our tagging vessel. We don't capture sharks, we don't handle sharks, we don't pull them out of the water, we don't attach them to the boat. What we do is we try to apply tags while the sharks are just free swimming in shallow water. And so what you see in this photograph is a picture of our spotter pilot, Wayne Davis, who has taken this photo of me placing a tag at the base of the dorsal fin of a white shark. And we use the plane to locate the sharks when they're hunting in shallow water. And then we use a boat called the Aleutian Dream, which is run by John King, sponsored by the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. It has a long pulpit that you can see me standing on. What that pulpit does is it allows me to get close to the shark without spooking it, and then use a very long tagging pole with a dart attached to a tagging needle that I will insert into the base of the dorsal fin. So you can see the tag trailing just behind the dorsal fin of this shark that I just tagged. So I've got a video of this, which you will see us coming right up over the shark. I'll place the tag right at the base of the dorsal fin. It's done. We're not in any way attempting or modifying the behavior of that shark. I'll show it again. The shark in many cases is spooked by the fact that I'm hitting it with this pole. Doesn't expect that, but it goes right back to its normal swimming pattern. We try not to be invasive in any way because we don't want to modify the behavior of the shark in close proximity to where people are in the water. To us, it makes perfect sense. If we thought we were modifying the behavior, we simply wouldn't be doing this. Okay, so what have we done so far? Starting in 2009, we started tagging. We didn't have the support of the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy in those days, so we didn't have as much effort or tags, actually up until 2012 or 13. But since then, now we've put out 226 acoustic tags. We're 230 sharks, actually. 226 of them have acoustic tags, 63 have pop-up satellite tags, 15 have real-time satellite tags. And what you can see on the right side is where we have seen sharks from the spotter plane during our tagging activities. And it wasn't until 2018 that we started moving into Cape Cod Bay and trying to put some effort into there. So most of our effort is along the outer Cape. And so what you can see here is that basically we are seeing sharks everywhere that we're working. And we're able to put tags into these animals. Some of them have a combination of tags. So what I'm going to do is walk through now what these tags are telling us and how we're learning from these tags about where, when, and how these sharks are utilizing the nearshore areas of Massachusetts to feed on their prey. I'd like to give a size distribution so people get a sense of the fact that we're tagging not only adults, but also subadults and juveniles. So we see a full size range of sharks off the outer Cape, but it's dominated by animals in excess of 9 feet long. This total length is in meters. And these two lines indicate the size at maturity for males on the left and the dotted line being females on the right. So you can see that we not only get juveniles, call these animals in the 3 to 4 meter range, subadults, Think of them as teenagers, even though they're older than that. And then we get adults as well. You know, the reason it's dominated by these larger fish is simply because you have to be a big white shark in order to successfully attack and kill a seal. Smaller white sharks feed almost exclusively on schooling fish, invertebrates like squid. Bigger white sharks continue to feed on those things, but then augment their diet with larger prey, including seals, and in other parts of the world, sea lions. So I'm going to focus a lot on the acoustic technology because I think it answers a lot of great questions about what these sharks are doing in nearshore areas. It gives us a sense of where the sharks are going, where they spend their time, when do they arrive, when do they leave. The way this technology works is you put a tag on the shark, like exactly the same tag you saw me just put into the shark while it was free swimming, that emits very high frequency sound. That sound is detected by acoustic receivers that we've put out all around Massachusetts. And anytime the shark swims roughly within 1,000 feet of that receiver, it will be detected by the receiver, and the receiver will determine the date, the time of day, as well as who that shark is. What individual shark is that? We then go back and collect the receivers. We're able to look at where the sharks are spending their time, as long as we have an adequate acoustic receiver array out there. And so this gives you a sense, this animation gives you a sense of the technology. Here we see a bunch of animated sharks. Each one of those yellow dots represents our acoustic receiver array around Cape Cod. So the sharks are being detected. We'll then haul those receivers and determine if there's any specific areas, any specific habitat, any specific time of day or tide or water temperature. You can go right down all these different factors to determine when are the sharks around Massachusetts. And this is what our array looked like in 2020. The little white circles are our acoustic receivers. We also deployed a technology that allows us to get information of sharks being detected immediately, instantaneously. And I call those the live receivers. Those are represented by the yellow stars. We had 5 of those deployed in 2020. Those worked fairly well. So anytime a shark swam, again, within the range of the receiver would detect the shark and then instantaneously transmit that to emails or cell phones, depending on how that receiver was configured, what the individual towns wanted. So all of these are major swimming beaches extending from head of the meadow down to North Beach and Chatham. And lifeguards in some of those beaches were notified immediately if there was a tagged shark within the detection range of that receiver. And towns like Wellfleet utilized that information then to make decisions relative to beach closings, to educate the public at the beach. So it was really an amazing tool to use and to test and to get some excellent results from. These boxes that you see are fine scale arrays that we're working with the Center for Coastal Studies to look at the nearshore behavior of white sharks as it relates to the environment, as it relates to that habitat. So in other words, how as it relates to the bathymetry of the area, sandbars, the existence of sandbars, the currents moving through that area, all those aspects. And so I'll talk about those fine scale arrays in a second, because they really did produce some amazing information from these 2 areas, one at Head of the Meadow Beach and one down at Nauset Beach. So let's answer some basic questions. When are the sharks here? So all we do is we plot out all our detection data by month. So we go to our receivers, we pull all our receivers, we look at our detections, and we then look at the month. And you can see that June is a very slow month. July, it begins to ramp up, but our peak months, the sharks are here off of Massachusetts, and this largely reflects what happens throughout New England based on our other detection data, which I'll show you shortly from other regions. Peak months are August, September, and October. And I want you to look at the number of detections here on the left. That's not the number of sharks, okay? That's the number of times the sharks are detected by the receiver. So you see these giant numbers of 15,000 sharks tagged, detections. That actually represents probably about 180 sharks, right? So you can see that the peak months, August, September, and October. So we've already learned about the seasonality of white sharks in our region. So if you're a surfer and you don't mind surfing in December, January, February, March, April, May, you've got easy decisions to make. But when you look at these months of August, September, and October, and if you're like a beach manager in any of these outer Cape towns, you're thinking, oh boy, August is a big month for us. September, the kids go back to school, but the weekends are still busy, and October can also have visitors here. So now we've got to think in terms of how we're going to manage our beaches during those peak months. So where do they spend their time? So again, we just take our detection data and we plot it out for each receiver. And so here you can see our receiver array off of Massachusetts, extending from basically Boston south to the Cape Cod Bay and then along the outer Cape. And all we've done is plotted the number of sharks on each receiver. So it's really simple. So the darker these colors, which you see here, have detected over 60 sharks. The lighter the colors, which you see in Cape Cod Bay and along the South Shore, have detected the fewest sharks. So we can see that the outer Cape in particular is a hot spot for these white sharks. It's where they spend the bulk of their time, right, over the course of the summer months. Again, over the course of those peak months. And then we can say also, well, also the eastern side of Cape Cod Bay is where these sharks are weighing in, but certainly not to the extent that they're doing so along the outer Cape. And so you can also see that these areas, and you can't see it here, but are also where the seals are, for the most part, spending the bulk of their time. So the sharks are drawn, obviously, by the seals. And so if we combine time and space, we can then plot out the season for sharks. And this was 2019. So what we'll do is we're walking through the season, and you're looking at each receiver. And as each receiver swells, you get the greater number of detections on it. And so you can see now we're progressing into August, and we're progressing into, which is our peak months. As we walk through August, you'll see the bubbles are getting bigger. That's greater numbers of detections, which equates to greater numbers of sharks. You can see that not a lot of activity along the South Shore, even though Plymouth will blow up a little bit, and that's a single shark visiting Plymouth during that time period in October. Now we're getting into November, and you'll see the numbers begin to dwindle. And as we get into late November, they'll all but disappear, and by December, they'll be gone. So there's the seasonality and the spatial distribution of white sharks over the course of 2019, derived from our acoustic data. And so when we look at our acoustic data beyond Massachusetts, what's really cool about this technology is that we're not the only researchers using it. Researchers all the way from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico are deploying acoustic receivers to study a variety of species. Many of those in the Gulf of Maine are being used, for example, to study the occurrence of sturgeon. And there's a number of research groups doing that. Even though they're studying and tagging sturgeon, or they might be studying and tagging striped bass, or even lobsters, those acoustic receivers that they put out will detect any species tagged with this technology. So right after the incident in Maine, which you see marked here in yellow, we went to our database and we mined those data sets that were shared with us by researchers in Maine as well as in Canada. And I decided to plot them out so you can see where our white sharks tagged off of Cape Cod have also been detected along the Maine coast, right up into the Bay of Fundy, and even along the outer parts of Nova Scotia. We found that about 40 of our tagged sharks, 25% of them, move up into the Gulf of Maine. The problem is there's a relatively limited number of acoustic receivers along this coastline, which is a massive coastline. For those of you in Maine right now, it's it's extensive, it's complex, it's very, very different from Cape Cod. But what we did right after the attack in Maine is I sent a bunch of acoustic receivers up to the state Department of Environmental Marine Resources, and the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy then added an additional 12 receivers. James Sulikowski from Arizona State University sent a bunch, and what we're trying to do, working with the state, and they had a few on the shelf as well, is fill in a lot of these areas to try to get a sense, to begin the process of what we did here in Massachusetts. Let's get a sense of where and when white sharks are in that part of the Gulf of Maine. Are there hot spots, and what's driving the presence of these animals? And so this is just preliminary data that we've drummed up from just the tags that we are putting out. And our argument here in Massachusetts is, we're tagging a whole bunch here. They're going up into the Gulf of Maine. Go ahead and take advantage of the fact that we've got tags on animals, and start figuring out where they're going in your neck of the woods. And that's exactly what they're doing. The other technology that we are using to try to get a sense of where these animals are going, but in the three-dimensional space of the ocean, is because these tags don't give us temperature and depth information, the acoustic tags, we're using what's called a short-term pop-up satellite tag. And you can see one photograph of one right here. And what we do is we pick an animal that we know, and we go ahead and we put this pop-up tag on it. And the tag is only on for a month. And we know the shark is going to spend that month in Cape Cod because based on its patterns of behavior over the previous years, we know that that animal is a Cape Cod shark for much of the summer. And so this is an example of a shark we tagged on July 20th, and the tag came off on August 17th. Once it's floating at the surface, it then transmits data to us on the depth and temperature of that animal. So we could plot out not only where it was because it had an acoustic tag, but also the depths that those sharks were at. And so these are 8 individual sharks, and you could see over the course of a month for each of them, the depths they went to. And you can see that in some cases they get down to 75 meters deep, which means they move offshore, but they also come right back inshore. Each time there's an X, you can see that those are detected by our acoustic receivers. So these sharks are basically cycling inshore, offshore, staying close to Cape Cod. And it turns out when we look at the probability of a shark being in shallow water, we've learned that almost 50% of the time, these sharks are in less than 15 feet of water. And again, if you're managing a beach, there's a 50% probability that a white shark is in less than 15 feet of water. That's very, very useful information when it comes to designing how you're going to manage these beaches. So it's, again, using another technology to get a sense of three-dimensional movements of these animals and make it relevant to learning about their fine-scale behavior and public safety. But the big question we're really starting to try to dive into, and this is a really hard one for us to answer, is how do they hunt their seals? What drives this predatory behavior? And, it's a classic, predator-prey relationship. And all that means is sharks want to eat seals, and seals don't want to get eaten. And so the seals have to adjust their strategies in order to feed successfully while not getting consumed by sharks. And then the sharks have to figure out how to hunt and kill seals, eat them, while the seals is changing its mind on how it's going to behave. So it's this really classical relationship that we're trying to learn more about. And there are patterns to this hunting behavior. Does it only happen, for example, at high tide? Is it the new moon? What drives this behavior? So we're really intensively trying to model hunting behavior as it relates to environmental factors, like time of day, like tides, like lunar cycle, like water temperature. Again, trying to get a sense what drives the behavior of these sharks and what are the seals doing in response to that. And so there's a number of techniques we're using. One of them is we're out on the water, sometimes 25, 30 times over the course of a season. So we will see a predatory attack by a shark on a seal. So we can determine, okay, where and when is that happening? You can record the variables associated with that event. And our spotter pilot, Wayne Davis, is in the air, and he sees these, and this is an incredible photograph of a white shark in hot pursuit of a gray seal. This seal gets away because it swims into shallow water, and that's a classic strategy to get away from a white shark. This is a white shark that successfully fed upon a gray seal that we photographed, and we're able to go up and then observe the behavior of the shark as it's consuming the seal. All too often, unfortunately, though, we don't get to see the whole process from start to finish. In other words, the shark hunting that seal. What precipitates the strike? What are the conditions when that happens? Instead, we get there after the fact. And yes, we can get visuals of how the shark is feeding on the seal. We can see that it's targeting that thick layer of blubber, which is really rich in fats and sustain the shark over long periods of time. So it's an incredible source of food for the shark. But we want to see how these kinds of events precipitate from start to finish. And what's remarkable, although we've been out there literally hundreds of times, we've probably seen less than 20 actual observations of sharks attacking and successfully killing seals. So we have to use other methods, indirect methods, to study this behavior. And this is where we get to our fine scale arrays that we're working with Brian Laguerre and the Center for Coastal Studies on. And so, as I showed you earlier, if you look in the upper right-hand corner here, you can see two boxes. One of these is head of the meadow, the other is Nauset. I've blown them up down here, and you can see the shoreline to the south here at head of the meadow, and all these dots. Each one of these dots represents an acoustic receiver. At Nauset Beach, you can see along the eastern edge of the beach, these yellow triangles, each one of those represents an acoustic receiver. By packing these acoustic receivers so close together, anytime a shark swims within one of these arrays, we can track its exact movements. We then go and map, we meaning the Center for Coastal Studies, the topography, the bathymetry, the hydrography of the area. So what you see here in different colors, each of these maps is the depths. So we can get a sense of where the sandbar systems are and what channels or paths these sharks may be using to get close to the beach. And so I don't have the data yet from 2020. Brian is working that up. This is part of his PhD at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. But we do have some preliminary data from 2019 for the head of the meadow beach. And what you see here are the paths of 31 individual sharks that moved through that acoustic receiver array. So you can see how we can track the individual movements and as they relate to the underwater topography. And this is the array that was really only out for about 3 weeks. And 31 of our acoustic tagged sharks went through there. So we can then animate that and we can look at what behaviors what these animals are doing relative to, again, time of day, to tide, all those environmental factors that will help us predict where a shark is likely to be hunting a seal. If I can tell a swimmer where a shark is likely to be hunting a seal, that swimmer is likely to say, oh, good, useful information, I won't go there. And so this is the back of one of those individual sharks, an animation that Brian built that I think is really cool. The black dots represent the acoustic receivers. You could see the underwater bathymetry that has been mapped here. The sandbar system, the sharks moving between two sandbar systems. So we have a outer sandbar or inner sandbar. We have a pile of seals actually that is in this area. And this shark is remaining in the deep water between these two sandbar systems. Again, more useful information. So if we understand the topography of the beach and we understand how the shark behaves relative to that topography, we can then determine where it is most likely to be hunting seals. And I think the one thing I want you all to understand is white sharks are big animals. They're big predatory animals. And they really don't like to be in shallow water unless there's some kind of energetic payoff. It's not really beneficial for them to have to deal with the tides, the currents, the changes in depth that occur with tide. And so the only reason they're in shallow is to hunt seals. So a shark in shallow water isn't just hanging out. It is in predatory mode. And we have to make that assumption when we talk about these animals being in these areas. Another technique, so we've got those acoustic receiver arrays out to give us a sense of how the animal's behaving relative to the local environment. And again, that allows us to model those aspects of it. Another technology that we began using in 2019, and now we are using again in 2020, we've deployed this now 15 times. It's what's called an acceleration data logger. It's basically a camera system built into a tag along with a bunch of sensors that give us the three-dimensional movements of that animal. So we can actually look at what the animal is doing from the animal's perspective, in addition to measuring how it's behaving in the water column. So here you can see, I just tagged this animal. It is pulling one of these tags. The tags are designed to be on for 12 to 48 hours, depending on how we program it. They then float to the surface and we pull the data from them. This is what the tag looks like. You can see it's affixed to another tag. This is the permanent acoustic tag that'll tell us when the shark is in our acoustic receiver arrays. This is where this tag detaches, floats to the surface, and then we retrieve it. So what I'm going to show you is a shark that we tagged in 2020. This is the shark with the camera tag system on it. It is hunting these seals. And what this shark did right after this was it made a charge into the beach. It actually went after one of these seals, but did not get it. It's these two behavioral patterns that we can then see in the data set. So what I'm going to show you now, and it's going to play rough, but it'll be the view from the tag on the back of the shark as it's rushing into shallow water to attempt to kill this seal in the surf zone. Going into the surf zone is dangerous for the shark because sharks are big and they will strand. So here's the perspective from the tag. So we're basically riding the back of a white shark. You can see the acoustic tag here, mounted at the dorsal fin, and then you can see the view of the shark's head, its dorsal fin. You can even see the bottom, hopefully, ripples in the bottom. Now this shark is just cruising, but now it's going to accelerate toward a seal. And the cameras, because it's tethered, is going to go crazy. So you're not going to see a lot until we slow it all down. And here's the shark crashing up into the shallow water. It is then getting into the surf zone, and it's making a hard turn trying to get to the seal. The seal is fast. As soon as the seal sees the shark, it can elude the shark. And the shark, unfortunately for the shark, unfortunately for the seal, misses, and the seal gets away. When I look at this video and slow it down, you can actually capture the image of the seal as the shark's going for it. And once the seal, again, sees the shark doesn't have a chance because the seal, believe it or not, is a much more agile and better swimmer than the shark is in shallow water. So then we can look at the data from the tag. So here's the tag going onto the fish. Here's the shark then descending. And when the shark is tagged, you can see a bump in the acceleration. This is the movement of the tag in 3 dimensions. All right, forward, up, down, and back and forth, right and left. And so I tag the shark, and it increases. It swims away from me. Boom. And then the shark is on the tag, and then we can see, you know, after the tagging, there's these 2 other bumps. So we can actually get a signature of what these predatory events look like. We can correlate that with the imagery from the video, and then we can see how frequently sharks are attempting to attack and kill seals, how frequently they're successful, how many seals might they eat over the course of these periods that we're deploying the tags. We can extrapolate that to population size, which we're working on. So we can get a sense of these patterns of predatory behavior without necessarily having to actually be there and see it. So it's a great way that this technology can be used to look at the predatory behavior of these animals. We can then take these data sets and rebuild the movements of that shark in 3-dimensional space. So here are the data: depth, temperature, acceleration in 3 dimensions on the left side, and then a recreation of the shark attempting to go for seals, missing, and then moving off. And that's the beauty. We can actually study the behavior using highly sophisticated technology. Ultimately, we're using all these data sets, and I keep going back to trying to model the patterns that we're seeing, assuming we see patterns in behavior, and its relationship to environmental conditions. So for example, if we find that there's a specific temperature that these white sharks are around, we can then look at near real-time satellite data, match it up with this relationship, and even generate forecast maps for areas that may or may not be more safety oriented for people. So we can really translate that to the probability of sharks being in a particular, this is just a heat map that you see on the right, and the brighter the color, the more likely a shark is to be in that area based on aspects of the model. So ultimately, and whether we do this in Cape Cod or in some other region, it's our way of taking the data we're learning, finding these patterns, taking those data and translating them to forecast maps as to where these sharks are most likely to be. And then the public can use that information to make decisions about where they want to be. And the public safety officials can as well. So stay tuned. We've got a lot of ongoing research in addition to that, but we deployed a whole bunch of these tags in 2020. The data are in, but we just haven't analyzed them yet. So I'll be happy to come back and show more information. I do want to highlight the fact that we have just formed the New England White Shark Research Consortium, which includes not only state agencies from Rhode Island to Maine, but also a number of private groups, including the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, which provides a lot of support for our research, but also the New England Aquarium, Center for Coastal Studies, Atlantic Shark Institute, and then the UMass, as well as University of Massachusetts and SMass. We just recruited UNH as well as UMaine, and then some federal organizations from Canada and the US. So we have this consortium to try to beef up research on this predatory species in this region, which basically extends from Rhode Island to Canada. And with that, I want to thank a whole bunch of folks who have helped us along the way and tell you about a couple books that are out. And I'll hopefully have some time, 10 minutes or so, for questions, because I know I blasted through it and I covered a lot of information, but hopefully I've piqued your interest and your curiosity.
Thanks so much, Greg. That was terrific. You certainly do have lots of questions here. I'll just start from the top with the first one that came in from Eric. Do great white sharks taste good?
Yeah, actually they do. They taste excellent. It's a lamnid shark. It's which means it's closely related to the mako shark, and as a result, the meat is excellent tasting. Now, unfortunately, for some who like to harvest sharks, the white shark is off limits. The U.S. has prohibited the retention of white sharks, and as a result, they cannot be landed to be consumed, or for any reason, actually.
All right, let's see. The next one, what percentage of tagging attempts result in a spooked fish?
Well, almost all the time they spook to some degree. Most of the time it's what you saw in my video. The shark will accelerate a little bit, then settle out after a few seconds. Sometimes, usually the larger the shark, the less spooked it is. We've tagged 16, 17 footers that don't even move at all. It's like they don't feel it, or I don't spook them in any way. The smaller ones tend to be a little bit, have a little more anxiety and don't like to be approached by big things. And our boat's big compared to the shark. And as a result, once the tag is in, the shark will bolt. And I've seen them accelerate at a pretty good speed. But again, they settle out based on the data coming back from the tags. They settle out. They don't leave. They don't leave the area. They settle out fairly quickly.
All righty, thank you. And how long does a tag transmit before failing?
That's a great, I love the question because I normally try to say this in the talk. What's really beautiful about the acoustic tags in particular is they have a life of about 9 to 10 years. So as long as they stay on the shark, and they don't always stay on the sharks will shed them. We've even had sharks bite them out of other sharks. But as long as they stay on the shark, we can follow the individual movements of that animal over the course of 9 years, which is absolutely amazing. So we know sharks. We've had sharks dating back to 2014. We started using this technology in big numbers that we see coming back year after year after year.
All right, Alusha asks, where are the sharks the rest of the year?
Yeah, you know what I can do? I can actually show you that. I didn't tried to keep this a little. Where do they go when they leave, right? So you remember my little green dots? My little green dots showed them to be a very coastal shark. We used pop-up satellite technology and real-time satellite technology to show that the white sharks actually have an oceanic component to their behavior. So this is the movement of the sharks. They actually overwinter for the most part off the southeastern U.S., anywhere south of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. They'll move up into the Gulf of Mexico, and then they'll come back north again in the late spring, early summer, spend half the fall, most of the fall, and then move out again in mid to late November. What's really cool though, and I'll show you this last slide, is when they move out into the open Atlantic, they start this really deep diving behavior. So this shows the sharks when they're on the continental shelf off the coastline of Massachusetts or the Gulf of Maine. And then once they leave there in late November, some of them will move out into the open Atlantic and dive to depths as great as 3,000 meters plus every day through a very, very broad temperature range. So it's a great question, and it's one we've published a paper on. And I didn't touch on it today because, again, we're trying to focus on this nearshore behavior.
All right, let's see. The next question is from Eric. Could greater number of detections be due to increased movement of the same number of sharks?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, what we try to do is we try to plot both detection data and number of sharks. You can have one shark go off of Plymouth, like we saw in the graphic I put up, and spend several days there, which really drives up the number of detections of one individual. So we really like to plot both detection numbers and number of sharks to get a sense of what those detections. The more detections, the more you have residency in an area by a shark or a number of sharks. But what most people tend to be interested in is the number of sharks, even though if you have a single shark hanging out in one specific area, it doesn't really matter in the number in terms of public safety purposes.
All right, questions still coming in here, Greg. Thank you for answering them. Irene asks, are seals ever tagged to determine when they arrive and the size of their population each year?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not a seal biologist, but I found that we're intensively studying one half the equation. And there are folks who have put tags on seals, and we published a paper recently with them that looked at behavioral patterns in seals over the course of a season or over the course of a year. So there is some information from tagging data on seals, but we need a heck of a lot more. I'm very much more interested in the really fine scale behavior. And again, the Center for Coastal Studies is dumping some energy into that this year, where they're looking at what patterns of behavior they're seeing in seals over the course of, several hours to a day, as opposed to over the course of months or a year or a season. So I think it's really important. In terms of numbers, population sizes have been calculated for seals. Right now, gray seal is somewhere hovering around 500,000 in the northwestern Atlantic. So that extends all the way from what amounts to Virginia all the way up to Canada. That's that population. And I guess estimates were that it was driven to really down to very, very low levels by the end of the last century. So it was really, really low, less than 10,000 or so animals. So it really indeed has come back. But they haven't updated that stock assessment in some time, and I think they're thinking of doing that. But good point about seals. We really need to know as much about them as we do about the sharks.
Okay, Bob asks, does your data appear on the shark location apps like Sharktivity or OSearch?
Yeah, so what we've done is, we're utilizing these live receivers. And there was a lot of concern, justifiably, from the town, the Park Service, and others, that it's great to have that information, but it needs to get out to the public. And so what the Conservancy has done is integrated it with the free Sharktivity app. So now, when a shark is detected on a live receiver, it appears on the Sharktivity app immediately. So people can use that as a guide to the presence of these animals. But I caution against using it as a public safety tool, simply because we haven't tagged every shark out there, and over the course of the next several months to a year, we should have an estimate of what proportion of sharks we have tagged. But realize we haven't tagged them all. So just because there's not a shark pinging on that receiver on your Sharktivity app doesn't mean there's not a shark there.
Okay, let's see. Emily has a question. Is it more appropriate to refer to them as great white sharks or white sharks? Which is more accepted, common in the scientific community?
Well, white shark is the more accepted term by the scientific community. Great white sharks are used, though, almost by everyone else. And I'll even call them that every now and then, just so people don't get confused. But yeah, great white is typically what appears in newspapers and on TV and TV shows. But white shark is the accepted term by the scientific community.
Great. Here's a question from Eric. Any receivers around Cape Ann where we have a small group of seals on the outer islands?
Yeah, I think I know that, Eric. He probably also asked that can you eat a white shark question, I imagine. But yeah, we've got a smattering of receivers and up to the north there, but we need to beef that up, frankly. Bill Hoffman and our guys over at the Gloucester Laboratory have got a number of receivers in that area, but I'm always looking to expand around Cape Ann and north of Cape Ann, quite frankly. And by the way, one of the ways we do that is the reason we have so many receivers in the Cape Cod Bay as well as in the South Shore is I work with each town harbor master, and they help get them out for me, because the care and maintenance of these things is a lot of work. But if I can partner with the town and they're willing to put it out and retrieve it, I'll gladly provide it.
So, Greg, I'm seeing that we're a minute away from 1 o'clock. We have about a dozen more questions. Don't want to keep you longer than you expected to be. Maybe another option is okay.
Yeah, I mean,
great.
People have to leave. I don't mind sticking around another 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, thank you. So it looks like the next one is from Irene. Will the shark eat the entire seal, and do they ever share with other sharks while eating?
Well, it's never called sharing in the shark world. It's more like theft. And we don't see that at all really off Cape Cod, but it's well published in other parts of the world, particularly off the Farallon Islands, California, that it's not unusual for a shark to kill a seal, and in those cases it's typically a California sea lion or it's a juvenile elephant seal, and for a bigger shark to come over and steal it from it. And I think that's what size brings to it. We have not seen that on Cape Cod, but again, remember, we haven't seen a lot of attacks on seals, and most of the time the shark will consume at least if it's a smaller seal, it'll consume the entire seal. If it's a larger one, it'll focus on the thick blubber layer, and we will find a carcass. And sometimes we certainly find live seals with bites, and then we find a dead seal with a single bite, which means that it occurred so close to shore that the seal was able to get away onto the beach, but died regardless.
Okay, let's see. Jim is asking, do you have data that logs swim speeds in hunting mode versus cruising, near shore movement versus deeper waters?
Yeah, I like the question because it really points to a couple of technologies that we're using. The Popup satellite tag, which gives us depth and temperature information, we can look at patterns in the behavior over broader scales. In other words, when they move offshore and when they move great distances. And so what we're able to do is stratify those data sets and look at patterns of vertical use to get a sense of whether that represents any behavioral shifts. But we can also do that with the acceleration data logging tags. And that's one of the things we're working on right now. What's really amazing is, there's gyroscopes built into this. It's these tags. We can get acceleration. We can't get good estimates of speed, unfortunately, but we can get direction and altitude, attitude, water temperature, and acceleration. And what we're able to do is then again look for different behavioral states in those very, very high resolution data sets. So a single deployment will be measuring those aspects 20 times a second. And so as a result, we'll have over 1 million data points, rows of data for each one of these deployments. So we're working with a number of other collaborators to manage these big data sets. And we're going exactly through that to find different behavioral states so that perhaps we can get a sense of, all right, the shark is just cruising, the shark is hunting, the shark is attempting a strike. We've even seen one shark rest on the bottom, which we never anticipated in this species. And that's very well indicated in the behavioral data set.
Wow, okay. Lee is asking, to what degree does the tag impede the shark's ability to catch its prey?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you mark an animal, and it applies to, moose, turtles, sharks, striped bass. The one thing you want to do, your goal is to study natural behavior. And the one thing you don't want to do is impact the behavior of the animal just through the tagging process or with the tag itself. And so we use an intramuscular dart that has been used since really the early 1960s to mark sharks. And we know, based on hundreds of studies that have been done on the behavior of sharks using this tagging technique, that it is the least invasive possible. And then the other thing to consider is, what kind of drag are we producing by putting, something that the shark is, pulling around? And so we've done a number of models, and researchers have done models relative to tag size, hydrodynamics, drag, weight in seawater. And we found that the current designs we're using have minimized all those aspects so that we don't impact the behavior of the shark. And the very fact that we've been able to actually see normal predatory behavior, even pulling what it looks like a large camera tag system, which is actually weightless in the water, except for a slight positive buoyancy, it tells us that we're not impacting the behavior of the animal. But a great question. I really like it.
Great, let's see. Irene is wondering, do sharks eat anything other than seals?
Yeah, absolutely. White sharks will feed on a fairly broad diet. And we used to think of them as feeding on fish and squid and then switching to seals and dead whales. But they really just augment their diet with seals and dead whales. They still continue to feed on other species of fish, including tunas, other sharks. They love to scavenge whale carcasses. That's a huge source of energy for them. And they'll feed on squid. So it's a pretty broad diet. But the bigger they get, the more they will be able to, or have the capacity to take on the bigger prey.
Okay, this next question, I'm not sure if I understand it. Maybe you will. From Ed, Sandwich, Mass. Are the tracking studies to study response to shark deterrence, such as sound, chemicals, etc.?
Yeah, I think that there's a big push, and I can see why. You know, there are a number of deterrent systems that have been developed and have yet to be tested in Cape Cod waters. And that's a fruitful area for research, and one we're certainly more than happy to partner with folks on, if the funding was available. So, for example, you know, the use of underwater fencing or large magnetic fields, electrical systems, early warning sonar systems, drone systems. You know, all these have been proposed as potentially being helpful in at least alerting the public to the presence of these sharks or deterring the presence of these sharks, repelling sharks to some extent. I absolutely think that's an area that should be looked at. If we had the funding, we would perhaps bring people on to do that. Right now, we are testing some aerial technology using fixed camera systems on blimps. I know there are folks that have tried drone systems, but some of these other technologies are extremely expensive. The underwater sonar system is cost prohibitive for us, but coupling that with some of our acoustic technology would be a great study. So yeah, I understand the question, and I think there's work that can be done in that area. I think that the idea of a single technology being 100% effective is not likely to be true. But at the same time, if you combine multiple technologies and you can alert the public to the presence of these animals in real time, that could be very useful.
Okay, Elizabeth asks, are there acoustic monitors deployed near the mouth of the Saco River in Maine?
Now, I'll have to look at the main receivers, the ones that were deployed in 2020 as they expand that array, and they're going to deploy even more in 21. It's a good question. I'll have to go back to my main notes to do that, and maybe reach out to my colleagues in the state of Maine. But yeah, I'll double check. I don't think there is, but I'll double check that.
Okay. Lee wonders, from your data observations, what is the relationship between white sharks and estuaries?
Yeah, I like the question. You know, I found when we were working on white sharks off the coast of Florida, they had a definite attraction to effluent from estuaries. We see on Cape Cod definite association with the North Cut, which is North Chatham, where the Pleasant Bay offloads into the Atlantic. And I've seen we've seen sharks spend quite a bit of time in that area. I don't know whether they're drawn to the high productivity of those areas. Simple fact that the seals have to come and go from Chatham Harbor and Pleasant Bay, and the sharks are placing themselves in the best area for them to intercept them. And that's probably the case when sharks do associate with us. They tend not to go into estuaries, but they tend to be near the outflows from estuaries.
This next one you touched on. Elizabeth is wondering if you can speak about the Sharktivity phone app. I know you mentioned it already.
Yeah, Sharktivity is an app developed, financed by the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. It's a free app. It puts a lot of our acoustic detection data on it. It tells you where sharks have been detected, so you can get a sense of where they occur. As I've said before, you will also get real-time information from our live buoys on that app, so you'll know when the last detection was at a particular beach that has a live buoy. So at Head of the Meadow, at Newcomb Hollow, or LeCounte, or North Chatham, Orleans, those areas with live buoys. But as I said earlier, I caution people to use it as a public safety tool, because it only really puts up tagged animals, and it does not give you a sense of where the untagged animals are.
Should I keep the questions coming, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, how we doing? We still have folks hanging in there. Why don't we give it a few more minutes?
Okay, you just let me know when you wanna stop here. The next one is, let's see, is there a diurnal pattern associated with predatory behavior?
One of the slides I did not show, and maybe I can get to it actually, is this one, okay? And it's a great question, because what we're finding out is that individual sharks are very different from each other. So we're seeing a lot of intra-specific variation in behavioral patterns. Some sharks exhibit a diurnal pattern, others do not. Others exhibit nocturnal patterns. What this slide shows is 3 sharks that we've tagged for multiple years, James, Lumpy, and Cool Beans, with their photos. And then these heat maps. And again, with the heat map, I want you to look at the areas that are brightest. The areas that are brightest are the areas that are utilized the most by those individuals. So James, in other words, really does spend the bulk of his time off of Chatham down to Chatham Inlet. But this is the spot. When you look at Lumpy, Lumpy is more of a monomoy shark. Then you see a shark like Cool Beans that has really no preference in terms of the areas that it utilizes, except it tends to avoid, James's neighborhood. So does this mean there are dominant sharks in individual areas and there's some territorial behavior going on? We don't know. And we continue to mine these data sets, but what it does indicate to us is there's a great deal of variance associated within the species relative to their behavioral patterns. And that makes it difficult to draw conclusions and make generalizations. There might be a shark that exhibits diurnal behavior, but there might be, and there's another one that exhibits nocturnal behavior. And it might be their way of resource partitioning. In other words, you hunt during the day, I'll go in at night. It's to avoid each other. It's to minimize competition for resources. So it's a great question, and one that gives you a sense, the answer gives you a sense of how difficult it is to study these animals that exhibit. Normally, when you study a fish species, you come up with general patterns. But in the case of the white shark, that's not happening.
Greg, it looks like we have 5 questions left.
All right.
Until we're at the end. The next one is, what would their food source be during the winter deep diving?
I love it. Yeah, that's if I could answer that, I'd be pretty popular. There's a whole bunch of folks that make up answers to that question, but what we've noticed when we use this sophisticated technology, whether it be on white sharks or swordfish or mako sharks, is a lot of these animals exhibit an oceanic phase to their natural history. So white sharks tagged in California and Mexico, they go out into the middle of the Pacific. Our white sharks tagged go out into the middle of the Atlantic, and they exhibit these deep diving patterns. And we're all sitting here, scientists sitting here saying, why? Why are you going out there and diving to such great depths? There's got to be some kind of energetic benefit. And so we think it's perhaps associated with foraging. Maybe there's some deep water squid in the mesopelagic zone that they're feeding on, and that's all hypothetical. And but that's kind of where the state of the art of the science is. We don't know what they're doing in these oceanic areas.
All right. What are the primary senses used for predation? Sight, sound, smell, electromagnetic sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always asking myself that. How does a white shark, for those of you who are familiar with Cape Cod waters, you know that some days we get some good visibility and other days, most days we don't. So, we're always wondering, how does the shark find the seal? And so we figure that perhaps olfaction, smell, brings the shark within the vicinity of the seals, general area of the seals. Maybe they can hone in on some sound being generated by the seals themselves. I don't know how that's done. Again, that's a far field way of determining where a seal might be. But in terms of localizing exactly where it is, we figure that eyesight plays a major role. And so once the shark then sees the seal, it attempts to strike it. And that's probably where its electrosensory perception comes in, because that's really a near field sensory apparatus. In other words, the shark generally has to be within 3 meters, 3 feet, so a meter, in order to use that sense. So if the shark rolls back its eye, it's in hot pursuit of a seal, it might use its electrosensory perception to then bite the seal. And then, of course, taste probably plays into whether or not it's edible seal or not. And so, it uses this full suite of senses. And we assume that they kick in depending on the range from the seal itself. But I think eyesight's critically important. Remember, the shark has to ambush the seal too. So the shark has to get close to the seal without being seen. And so the shark tends to stay very close to the bottom.
The next one is from Michelle, who says, my 5th graders would like to know what is the most dangerous shark?
So danger being, which one has been implicated in unprovoked attacks on people. And so you're looking at it, the white shark is hands down number 1 in terms of the most documented unprovoked attacks on humans historically. That's followed by bulls and tiger sharks. But, and it's simply because these species tend to feed on larger prey. The white shark, which targets seals, will make a mistake and bite a person, which in the eyes of that particular white shark, and again, we got to emphasize the fact that these are extremely rare events. In the interpretation of that shark, it interprets a surfboard or a person or a kayak as a seal.
All right, we have 3 more if you're willing.
Why not? We've gotten this far.
How are the sharks affecting the population size and behavior of seals?
Yeah, that's one that we're going to hopefully answer in the coming months. I mentioned my colleague, Megan. She's a PhD student at UMass Dartmouth and also a staff scientist for the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. And the subject for her thesis is basically how many white sharks occur out here. And we're going to use those estimates to get a sense and couple that with our accelerometry data to get a sense of how many seals will a white shark consume over the course of a summer, and extrapolate that to the population size, and then see to what extent the white shark population can control the seal population. So yeah, there's a bunch of steps ahead of us, but we are, Megan's making great progress, and that study's going to come out, and when it does, I think that there'll be great interest in it.
Okay, these last 2 have to do with feeding behaviors as well. This one I think is related to another question. Could the sharks be hunting more at night when you can't see them?
Yeah, again, just going back to some of the stuff we talked about, the seal sees the shark and the game is over. Shark loses most of the time. And I've been swimming with white sharks in Mexico, and I've seen seals just swimming right around them. So they're really agile and very good in the water. So certainly hunting at night might give the white sharks some advantage. So the question is, what are the seals doing at night? And the seal data we've got so far indicates that when the sharks are around, the seals tend to go offshore foraging. They go to feed at night. So they'll leave right about dusk. and then they'll come back before the first light. So they'll come back before it gets bright out. And so they're doing that they think they can elude the shark because the shark can't find them at night, but the shark may actually be better at finding it at night than the seal believes it. So and the big problem we have is we can't study them at night because we can't see. So that's again why we're using these camera tags, which we deploy through the night.
Okay, last but not least, Sean is wondering, do you have any indication on the frequency with which sharks feed? Is it any time they come across potential prey?
Yeah, they're going to be opportunistic feeders. Certainly when they're targeting, again, this broad array of species. When they're hunting seals, again, they have to be selective. I think there's a learning curve too. A shark may know how to find a seal, may know what a seal smells like, but may not necessarily know how to attack and kill a seal. And so there's a learning curve to that as well. And so, how often that happens, we don't know yet. Again, the accelerometry data is the data source we're going to use for it. But, it's a great question. I'm hoping these answers come out in the next, as we analyze these data.
All right. Well, goodness, thank you so much, Greg.
My pleasure.
That was wonderful. Thanks for staying on, answering all those questions, and to all our participants, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. It was great to have such a big crowd. I appreciate it.